If you're an historical aviation enthusiast, then you've probably heard the story of the Kee Bird, a B-29 bomber that crashed in northern Greenland after the end of World War II. It had been sitting there for 50 years, and then in the 1990s, a crew went up there to try and recover it. Spoiler alert, they failed. But no one would have heard the story unless it was covered in an amazing documentary from PBS NOVA, specifically, called Frozen in Time. We're going to tackle that tonight, and I'm going to tell you everything I know about this story. Okay, the PBS documentary Frozen in Time came out in the 1990s, I think around 1995. I saw it when it first came out. I was shocked at what I had seen, and I've watched it hundreds of times since then. A book was written about it. I read the book, and I also, when I started the YouTube channel, decided to track down as many members as I could from that expedition.
My recollection is that Darryl Greenamyer had said, "I'm not taking off. I'm just going to move the plane to another area."
So tonight, we're going to dive into the PBS documentary Frozen in Time, and I'm going to tell you everything I know about it. So pull up a chair, grab some popcorn if you want. We're going to dive right in.
Tonight on NOVA, a B-29 flying a Cold War spy mission crash-landed in the Arctic. Her crew was rescued, but the Kee Bird was left behind. Nearly half a century later, a new team wants to bring her home.
Just like new again. It'll fly. You bet it'll fly.
But conditions are harsh, the work exhausting. Their shared dream becomes a life and death drama as they struggle to free the B-29 frozen in time.
Okay, I'm going to turn the volume down here. So it looked like it came out in 1996. So we're talking about we're talking about an expedition that's 30 years old, and I've been fascinated with it by it
C-141 lifts off
long time.
Thule Air Force Base. Once a vital staging post for the nuclear bomber fleet, Thule is now a relic of the Cold War. While its radar domes still probe the horizon, it is eerily quiet and almost deserted.
Okay, Thule is actually a shared air base, middle Greenland, along the western coast. It's a shared air base, U.S. air base, along with the Dutch. So let's see. It was built, I think, in the 1960s, and I remember reading that some people compared the construction of Thule with a level of complexity along the lines of like the Panama Canal. So it was tough to build the air base. You know, obviously harsh conditions, but you know, it like the documentary said, a relic of the Cold War. It was built there to have bombers in close proximity to the Russians.
One of the most remote and isolated outposts of the United States Air Force. It lies on the inhospitable barren shore of northwest Greenland, deep inside the Arctic Circle. The climate is harsh and unforgiving. Even in summer, when the sun never sets, it remains so cold that the sea is littered with icebergs. The weather changes hourly, from bright sun to dark, menacing storm clouds, with gale force winds.
And of course, you also hear stories about how it can be daylight for 24 hours.
250 miles north lies another relic of the Cold War.
Okay, so the Kee Bird has been sitting in northern Greenland for 50 years. Okay, went down right after, like I said, right at the end of World War II. And in this image right here, you can see it kind of sitting in a shallow lake, sitting up on its landing gear. That's going to be key. That's going to be a key question that we're going to answer pretty quickly at the beginning of this documentary.
An almost intact B-29 bomber. This plane, nicknamed the Kee Bird, became lost and crash-landed while on a secret mission. The crew was rescued, but the Kee Bird would lie here abandoned for almost 50 years.
Okay, so talking about the landing gear. You can see here, it's sitting in the snow. Person standing next to it. So the plane went down. It belly landed. Okay, and the whole crew survived. They're going to get into that, but you know, if it belly landed, then how is it sitting on its landing gear in that image I showed you earlier? Keep that in mind.
When the B-29 first flew in 1942, it could go higher and farther than any other bomber. In the war against Japan, it traversed the Pacific and crested the Himalayas. The culmination of the B-29's military service was when the Enola Gay dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, ending the war. Nearly 4,000 of these planes were built.
Hard to believe,
But now,
4,000.
less than a handful remain.
Yeah, I mean, 2 are only flyable.
If the Kee
right
Bird
now.
could be recovered from this Arctic wilderness, it would be a unique treasure of aviation history, probably worth a great deal of money.
So there you see it on landing gear. How did that happen?
Darryl Greenamyer, a former test pilot, has been working on a bold plan to rescue the B-29 and fly it back home. Darryl has flown higher and faster than most other living pilots. He'd once been a test pilot on the U-2 spy plane and its replacement, the SR-71 Blackbird.
You imagine
In the 70s, he built his own starfighter jet from spare parts to gain a low-altitude speed record, which he still holds. An accomplished pilot and engineer.
Hold on a second. So that low altitude speed record, that was recorded by flying. So he would get to ground level and he would enter a timing gate and then exit a timing gate. I think it might have been, well, it was over the desert in California. And so the documentary, which came out 30 years ago, said a few moments ago that he got this low altitude speed record, which he still holds. I actually looked it up. I think he still holds it. I don't think anyone's broken it. So even to this day, 30 years after this documentary, he still holds that speed record. If I'm wrong about that, put a comment in the video, but I think I'm right.
Used to taking risks. If anyone could pull this off, it was Darryl.
It really is a unique opportunity. It may be the only airplane in the world that I can think of that's been sitting somewhere for 50 years that you could actually get in and potentially fly. It's just in a faraway place.
You can only put so much information in a documentary. This documentary, I think, is about 55 minutes long, but the story is incredibly complex. So Darryl obtained the rights to recover the Kee Bird. Yeah, it's kind of its own country, but it's a colony of Denmark. So Darryl had to petition the government saying, hey, I want the right to go up there and investigate the Kee Bird. He couldn't just fly up there and check it out. So he got a permit, and I think this was in 1993. Now, there was another guy by the name of Gary Larkins, and Gary Larkins was kind of like the Indiana Jones of recovering World War II aircraft. He would go into the jungle. He was part of the expedition that recovered Glacier Girl, which is a P-38, part of the Lost Squadron that went down in northern Greenland during World War II. They were ferrying planes across Greenland. It was the quickest way to get planes from the U.S. over to England. They would have to go over Greenland. So the Lost Squadron, 6 P-38s, 2 B-17 bombers, got lost in terrible weather and ran low on fuel. So they all belly landed in the snow. And Gary Larkins was part of the expedition to locate one of those P-38s, dig down 200 feet into the ice and recover this P-38 and rebuilt into what we now know as Glacier Girl. Gary Larkins also knew about the Kee Bird. So he started petitioning the Danish government to get the recovery rights for the plane, because even though it was an American plane operated by the Air Force no longer claimed it. So now it's sitting on Danish land. Danish territory. So he had to get a permit. Gary Larkins did all of that work. With all the different projects he had going on, he did not have enough money to pursue it. So he needed a partner, and that's where Darryl Greenamyer came in. And Darryl eventually forced Gary out of the whole project, and he decided, you know, once the permits were secured from Denmark, Darryl took the whole thing over. So Gary Larkins ultimately was forced out. And I know that story. It's in the book written by Carl Hoffman, but I also was able to trade some emails with Gary Larkins, and he kind of confirmed the whole story. I might get deeper into that in another video. All right, let's keep going.
It really is a unique opportunity. It may be the only airplane in the world that I can think of that's been sitting somewhere for 50 years that you could actually get in and potentially fly. It's just in a faraway place. That's the reason it's available.
But getting the Kee Bird into the air requires more than skill and boldness. The bulk of the heavy supplies and machinery that Darryl would need has to be carried to Thule on the annual supply ship. A 5-ton bulldozer will be needed to build a runway for the B-29.
We're going to talk about that bulldozer in a little bit.
Tires and propellers are also required, along with 4 massive reconditioned radial engines. All of this equipment has to be carried north over the 250 miles of desolate Arctic landscape that separates Thule from the bomber. Darryl's solution to this is a 1962 Caribou, another of his salvaged wonders.
Yeah, this plane,
It's
it almost
basically
becomes
a
the star
short
of the show.
field, short landing and takeoff airplane, and it's made for unimproved fields. They use it in Vietnam a lot, and it's a pretty rugged airplane. It's ideal for this sort of thing, flying these engines in, and it'll carry a pretty good load.
Rick Kriege, who has been Darryl's chief engineer for over 7 years, is responsible for making his plans work.
So if you're familiar with the documentary, you know what ultimately happens to Rick. I did get an opportunity to talk to his daughter, Haley. We'll get into that later. But, you know, as I'm sitting here watching this right now, you know what? That's all I'll say about Rick right now.
Caribou's arrival in mid-July, Darryl's team is complete. Cecilio Grandi has been Rick's assistant for 3
I
years.
have not been able to find
working on
him.
the job.
I've been trying to track him down.
Vernon Rich is a toolmaker and machinist.
Vernon Rich, I've talked to him quite a bit. He's very generous with his time. He lives out in Arizona. He is an amazing mechanic.
And Bob Vanderveen, as well as being another pair of hands, is going to do the cooking.
So Bob Vanderveen is one of the, or he's actually the first expedition member that actually reached out to me when I created some of the other videos about the Kee Bird. He actually started commenting on some of my videos, and we eventually got into contact. Another person involved in the expedition, very generous with his time. He owned and operated a restaurant in California, Ramona, California, if I'm not mistaken. And so that's why he was asked to do the cooking. Apparently, Darryl Greenamyer used to spend a lot of time in the restaurant. They would have meetings about his various projects in Bob's restaurant. And of course, Bob, being an aviation enthusiast, quickly became involved.
Roger von Groot, a retired airline pilot and a distant relative of Baron von Richthofen, will fly the Caribou.
Spent time talking to Roger as well.
Darryl and the others take off from Thule.
So every flight that the Caribou took was almost a gamble. You know, are you going to make it or not? So you can see here, Roger being in the pilot seat, Darryl was the co-pilot, but he was extremely bossy. So they all kind of like argued back and forth, you know, but
their flight takes them over uncharted mountains and glaciers.
Ultimately, Roger was the pilot in
miles north. It is a risky journey into the unknown, with the chances of rescue are slim. Finally, they come to the valley where the B-29 came to rest.
There it is, sitting in the lake.
They fly low over the valley floor. Roger lowers the wheels and makes a brief touchdown to test how firm the surface is.
Yeah, there's a crazy part of the story that they don't talk about. We'll get to that in a second. Okay, so they touch down briefly to test how firm the ground is. And that allows Roger to at least get a general idea as to whether or not it's going to be firm enough to land. The Caribou is such a nightmare that apparently the sensor or indicator for the landing gear had been disconnected, or maybe it was faulty. I'm not exactly sure which it was. But when they came around again, and you're going to see this in a little bit, he brought the landing gear up after that first touchdown, felt pretty good. So he brought the landing gear up, but he's so concentrated on making a perfect landing, he forgets to lower the landing gear the second time. And everyone in the plane starts yelling at him. They don't show it in the documentary, but they do kind of refer to it or allude to it in a little bit. So I'm going to hit play. So they're going around again. He's brought the landing gear up.
So they go around and come in to make a landing.
And as they're coming down, Roger forgets to lower the landing gear again. Again, that indicator was either disconnected or is faulty. So everyone in the plane, Bob Vanderveen, Rick Kriege, everyone in the plane starts yelling, lower the landing gear.
If anything goes wrong now, the consequences could be fatal.
And of course, he gets the landing gear down in time. There's the bomber in the background. They're all happy, although just at that point, they nearly died.
But they make it.
Okay.
The relief and euphoria spill out as they
get out of the plane, and Roger, this is Roger right here. Okay. Pilot Darryl, of course, is already out, and Roger makes the comment, how about that? I think it's something to the effect of, how about that gear up landing? So pay attention.
Examine their landing strip.
Fantastic, huh?
If we can get the thing turned around in this soft dirt,
Oh yeah, we
Oh,
can. And in fact, with this, I felt this is the
Yeah.
first really soft stuff we hit. Look back there.
You like our gear up approach?
They just said it. Do you like our gear up approach? Here, I'm going to rewind real quick.
Yeah, we
Oh,
can. And
we
in
can.
fact, with this, I felt this is the
Yeah.
first really soft stuff we hit. Look back there.
You like our gear up approach?
Like our gear up approach. So the expedition almost was a disaster before it even started. They almost landed without the landing gear down. So that would have been the end of everything. And who knows, they all could have died. So it just kind of goes to show how dicey of a situation this was.
The team begins to set up camp as behind.
Okay, here's another thing. So check this out. They just touched down, and there's Bob Vanderveen right there. By the way, his hat, that's got a story in and of itself. But there's Bob Vanderveen right there. He's about to put his hat on these 55-gallon drums, and you see these aircraft pieces there. So if they just landed, where did all this stuff come from?
Behind them, the B-29 gleams like new in the chill Arctic sunshine.
They haven't even
A
sitting.
time capsule.
Look at that.
Preserved.
So they just show up, and where did all of this stuff come from? It's all of a sudden landing on its landing gear. So if it belly landed, where did all this stuff come from? So they were here before. They had checked the plane out before. We'll get into that.
in this remote valley.
Looks amazing.
All around is evidence of the remarkable story of the Kee Bird's last crew.
All of this stuff was scattered on the ground when they showed up. Bob Vanderveen, I remember, and Vernon Rich both commented about how crazy it was. This stuff was everywhere from the original crew that had to belly land in 1946.
For them, landing here had been nothing to celebrate. It had been the start of a frightening 3 days.
I honestly didn't think we was going to get out of it. I had made up my mind on the way down that this is no dream. This is reality. Face it and accept it.
Then we realized once we're out, the plane was not on fire. That was the main concern. Arnett made a hell of a good landing, and the airplane was intact.
Nobody was hurt in the crash landing, but they were stranded in a deadly climate miles from anywhere.
So what were they doing there? Why did they run low on fuel, and why did they have to ditch? If you see here,
Accept it.
Then we realized once we're out, the plane was not on fire. That was the main concern. Arnett made
John Lessman, and you can see here, if you look at his position, he was the Kee Bird's astro navigator. And all right, what exactly does that mean? The Kee Bird was on a secret test mission it was originally classified as a weather mission, but really what they were doing, it was a top secret test mission to see if you could navigate that far north, that close to the Arctic Circle. Because if you think about it, compasses, when you're that close to the North Pole, compasses don't work. So they had to devise a way, test different methods of navigation. If ultimately during the Cold War, they're going to be able to attack the Russians with bombing runs, you've got to be able to navigate accurately. And as I said a few moments ago, compasses don't work that far north. So this guy right here, John Lessman, was on board as an astro navigator to test navigation methods using the stars. And the weather was so bad, everything, there's such a dense layer of cloud cover, he couldn't get any kind of navigational fixes in to for them to figure out where they were. So he mentions here, it's like, he was just trying to get a fix in.
a hell of a good landing, and the airplane was intact.
Nobody was hurt in the crash landing, but they were stranded in a deadly climate miles from anywhere, not knowing if they would be rescued.
The biggest concern, I was too busy, frankly, wanting to get a position in to the search airplane so somebody would know where we were. That was
the big thing. So cloud cover prevented him from seeing any stars, but he was able, when they had landed, and then during the sunrise, he was able to figure out using the sun what latitude they were on. He couldn't tell where, and I think it was on the 46th. I'm not 100% sure about that, but he was able to tell what latitude they were on. He couldn't tell where on that line they were on, but he could at least tell people how far north they were. And at the time, they didn't know they were in Greenland. He actually suspected they might have actually crash landed in Russia. Now, why did they run short on fuel? If you're going to go on a mission like this, you would think you'd have plenty of fuel. Well, here's the other thing. Upon takeoff, they had no idea that the protective skid that protected the tail of the plane, from over rotating, you don't want to damage the tail of the plane. So this protective skid gets deployed. Well, upon takeoff, they thought that it had retracted, but it didn't. It was still down. And over the course of several hours, that created a tremendous amount of drag. It slowed the plane down, and they went through more fuel than they thought. And which, with that drag, it also screwed up their dead reckoning. So they thought they were in a completely different place than they actually were. And so this is the skid. There are some images of the Kee Bird where you can actually see the skid is down. So they all belly land, they all survive, they get out, and it's like the tail skid's down. No wonder we ran so low on fuel.
Wanting to get a position in to the search airplane so somebody would know where we were. That was a big thing, establishing our position and find out where the hell we are so we could be rescued.
Our spirits are high. We knew we were going to get out. There wasn't one guy that didn't feel like we weren't going to make it.
They were just freezing their butts off.
But I remember the cold and no place to go to get warm. That's the thing that I remember mostly about it.
I mean, you're talking about 20 degrees below freezing.
On the second day, an Air Force plane found the Kee Bird.
The greatest we felt was when that plane flew overhead with the supplies and they knew where they actually physically spotted us. That was the greatest feeling.
So this is video that was
A day
taken
later, a plane
by the rescue crew that landed. And the name of the plane, I think it was called Red Tail Rabbit,
landed beside them and flew them out to
So
safety.
that's the Kee Bird. There's the crew.
Now
There it is. Red Tail Raider. That's what the plane was called. And here, let me get my image out of the way. So the name of the plane was called Red Tail Raider. And it was flown by a guy by the name of, I think his name was Bobby Carnarvon. And he specialized in Arctic rescue, basically. So whenever crews would go down, northern Canada, northern Greenland, they would call on this guy. And the name of his plane there, Red Tail Raider. So they were able to touch down in this tight space. Okay, but now you've got 11 crew members from the Kee Bird coming on board, and they had to come up with a way to take off. Well, the Red Tail Raider had rockets attached to the fuselage of the plane, and that assisted with their takeoff.
at last, the Kee Bird was going to be rescued as well.
I've got torn feelings. Everybody's excited about getting it out, and I can make a lot of money on it, apparently.
You'll notice behind John Nessman and the co-pilot that they were interviewing, but you'll notice the background is the same. So the crew members, surviving crew members, they actually flew them up to Thule and they interviewed them there. So PBS actually paid for these surviving crew members to be at the Thule Air Force Base while the expedition to recover the aircraft was undergoing.
And everybody's going to look at this airplane. It's great and all that. But somehow it's something like going into an Indian grave as far as I'm concerned. I kind of feel like it belongs up there.
So
no longer claim.
So they don't talk about this at all in the documentary. I always wonder, it's like, what is this stuff that's just already up there? And take a look at this. You know, they're pulling cargo netting off of all kinds of equipment, 55-gallon drums cut in half, this hydraulic jack over here. You know, where did this stuff come from? They don't mention this at all, but they actually went up, I believe, in 1993. In 1993, when Gary Larkins originally got the permit and then Darryl kind of forced him out, he assembled a group that went up there to check out the Kee Bird and determine whether or not it was even salvageable. So Darryl went up with his father, Rick Kriege. They went up in a Huey helicopter. So the helicopter pilot was a guy by the name of Tommy Hoffman. And then they had a guy by the name of Wee Smith. And Wee Smith was a super handyman in this type of weather. And he was involved with that expedition to recover Glacier Girl. So Darryl, he assembled a group that went up there in 1993 in a Huey helicopter to check out the Kee Bird and determine whether or not it was even salvageable. And while they were there, that's how the plane ended up on its landing gear, because they had these hydraulic jacks with them. You see them right here. They fastened these hydraulic jacks to the skids of the Huey helicopter, and they jacked the plane up, lowered the landing gear, and they actually got one of the engines to start. It was the left outboard engine. They got to cough and start to turn, but the bearings were so twisted that the plane would have, or the engine would have shaken the plane apart. So they immediately shut it down.
Named by the Air Force, the Kee Bird was now available to anyone who could fly her out. Darryl and his team go to work.
Kee Bird, over.
The radio link to Thule is established. The tents set up.
This is where Bob Vanderveen does all the cooking.
And Bob starts work on recovering the damaged rudder, which, despite the aluminum construction of the B-29, had been covered in fabric. Then, as the Caribou taxis to return to Thule, their precarious situation is brought home to them.
Darryl was trying to taxi around. I was out watching, and then he got going a little bit, and then nose wheel just went all the way 90. Both tires.
Did you hear what Roger said? He said Darryl was taxiing the Caribou around, and so this is where, you know, it's like, so who's in charge of the Caribou? Is it Roger, the pilot, or is it Darryl? So Darryl, you know, they had a limited window, okay, and you had to just keep moving, and so there was some concern about weather, but Darryl took it upon himself. He would get into the pilot seat. He taxied the plane around. You know, if Roger was going to, it's like, oh, I don't know about the weather, Darryl would jump into the pilot seat and at least try and taxi the plane around. He was always pushing. He was always rushing. Well, guess what? Look what happened. You know, the tire gets ripped off the rim because of the mud.
Roll off the rim, lost all their air. I thought we were stuck there.
I wish I could find that guy, Celio.
It takes hours to dig the wheels out of the sticky mud. Rick's idea to use propane gas from the camp stove allows the Caribou to return to Thule, even though the wheels could explode if they get too hot.
So now
the plane takes off, leaving Rick, Bob, and Cecilio behind.
Okay, so it's Darryl and Roger that are flying back to Thule to get the next load of equipment that they're going to need as part of the recovery process.
Once at Thule, they refill the tires.
Don't make any sparks.
And this is the first time we see Vernon Rich. And Vernon, like I said towards the beginning, when we first started talking, he is out of Arizona, and he is an incredible mechanic, very knowledgeable, you know, when it comes to aviation. And I believe Darryl came across Vernon because Vernon was one of the few people that had successfully machined certain parts, certain components for aircraft. And Darryl asked him to join the crew, the expedition. So here's this, like I said, this is the first time we see Vernon.
It is vital to get the bulldozer up to the B-29 and improvise a runway. But the
Now check this out. In the documentary, they just show the bulldozer going into the Caribou, but it was not that easy. And I've got this image of the bulldozer. They had to stack it up on cribbing to get it to the same height as the Kee Bird. I'm sorry, same height as the Caribou. Apparently the bulldozer was too heavy to go up the ramp of the Caribou, so they had to come up with another way to get it into the plane. And so they had to stack it up on cribbing and then transfer it to a flatbed trailer and then back that trailer up to the Caribou. And you can see here,
Caribou will be seriously overloaded.
It's
and as Darryl inches the bulldozer into the plane, Roger is concerned.
You can see the tires from the trailer that they had to transfer the dozer onto. So they had to stack it on the cribbing, then they had to get it on this trailer, then they had to back the trailer up to the Caribou, and then they have to transfer the dozer into the Caribou.
And improvise a runway. But the Caribou will be seriously overloaded. And as Darryl inches the bulldozer into the plane, Roger is concerned.
So that's Darryl right there. He's the one that's running the bulldozer into the Caribou.
It's a little bit higher risk than I really thought it would be because Darryl maxes everything to the limit. If both engines run, it'll get off the ground.
Taking a look at this image here, you can see there was just absolutely no room to spare. And the bulldozer, is the only thing they loaded onto the Caribou for this particular run between Thule and the Kee Bird crash site.
If one engine quits, we're just going to have to crash straight ahead because one engine's not going to carry the load.
Look, so they were already doing maintenance on the Caribou. While they were there in Thule, you can see they've totally pulled the cowling off of the left engine. Okay, so all you got to do is look in the background and you can already tell this plane is going to turn into just a total nightmare. And here's Celio, and I'm not sure who that guy is. That's not Vernon right there, but there's Cecilio right there. So the Caribou's already turned into a problem.
If both engines run, it'll get off the ground. If one engine quits, we're just going to have to crash straight ahead because one engine's not going to carry the load.
The Caribou, slow and cumbersome, returns to the B29. Rick lights a bonfire so that Roger knows the wind direction for his landing.
God, it looks like they're just wasting a lot of fuel there.
As the day...
Here's a good shot. Basically, they were in this valley, and it was almost like being in a fishbowl. They were surrounded on all sides by high hills and mountains. So here's a good footage of the Caribou basically skimming down the slope to get to the level ground where it could finally touch down.
Dangerously overloaded Caribou comes into land. People on the ground do not realize that something has gone seriously wrong.
No flaps. Landing too fast. Oh man, so bad.
The flaps had failed, and Roger had nearly lost control.
So Roger was coming in, no flaps, too fast, so he was hard on the brakes. Because they just have a limited space of the ground. Because he was hard on the brakes, you saw how the tires started to dig into the tundra.
We came in no flapper. I knew you were coming. Oh, 90 knots. I was stalling. I was in this shaker at 90. And Darryl said, we can't do it without any flaps. I thought, I don't want to go all the way back to it. We're getting low on fuel.
Look at this.
The Caribou has plowed into the soft earth. Another inch, and the propellers would have smashed into the ground. Disaster had been narrowly averted.
But at least now they've got the dozer and they can start to try and pull the Kee Bird out. But this is a whole other
puts the
problem.
bulldozer to work on the B29.
So here, check this out. You can see the bulldozer in the background. Obviously, he's right up to the Kee Bird. And they tried attaching a cable to the nose gear of the Kee Bird, thinking that the bulldozer could pull the plane out. It couldn't. It wasn't strong enough. And they had to come up with another way. So what you're seeing right here, if you look, you see this really long cable buried into the dirt here. And they had some kind of anchor attached to the cable that they buried. And the bulldozer is over here. So they ran this cable through a pulley to the other end of the bulldozer, and it gave them a mechanical advantage of 2 instead of just 1 by doing it this way. So watch what happens.
Proving its worth.
So as the bulldozer advances, see, and there's the pulley. It's the pulley right there. And now that mechanical advantage allowed them to pull the Kee Bird to the shore. So there's
The Kee Bird is back on dry land for the first time in half a century.
We got it, eh?
When the giant B29
check that out. So Bob Vanderveen was telling me he had forgotten gloves. You know, everyone's wearing gloves while they're working on the plane. Okay, you can see it right here. Check this out. So they're working on all this sharp metal, but Bob had forgotten gloves apparently, and you can see he cuts his hand right here, right there. You see, so they're pulling the bomb bay doors off because they're all bent to hell, you know, from the belly landing. And you can see Bob cut his hand.
B-29 crashed in 1947. The bomb bay doors suffered the most obvious damage. They will be taken off to be replaced later.
Well, the snow really cushioned it real well. It built up under the bomb bays, and the bomb bay doors took all the load, and about 90% of the damage. There's a little bit of damage on the aft fuselage, and on the flaps, but that's it.
The propellers were badly buckled by the crash, and the main engine bearings were twisted. New ones will be put in their place.